Maria Santos never imagined that losing her job at the textile factory would lead to the most extraordinary moment of her life. When the eviction notice arrived at Rosie's diner, the place where she'd scrubbed floors for minimum wage every night for 3 years, she thought her world was ending. But standing in that empty restaurant, facing the man who'd just bought the building, she couldn't believe her eyes. It was him, the skinny teenager she'd fed her last sandwich to on a cold December night, now grown into a successful businessman who remembered every kindness she'd shown him. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any more amazing stories, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The story begins 5 years earlier, on a night when the December wind cut through downtown Millbrook like a blade. Maria Santos pulled her worn winter coat tighter as she hurried down Maple Street, her cleaning supplies rattling in the plastic bucket she carried. At 34, she'd already lived more hardship than most people, twice her age, but she wore her struggles quietly, the way she wore her faded jeans and second-hand sweaters, with dignity that poverty couldn't touch. Her daughter, Isabella, was safely asleep at Mrs. Chen's apartment upstairs from their cramped studio, and Maria was grateful for the elderly woman's kindness in watching her 8-year-old while she worked the night-paying shift at Rosie's diner. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it was steady work, and Maria had learned long ago that steady was better than hoping for better. The diner sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, its neon sign flickering pink and blue against the dark sky. Rosie's, in cursive letters, with a cartoon cherry that had lost most of its red paint over the years. Maria had her own key to the back entrance, a privilege that came with being the most reliable night cleaner Frank Rosenberg had ever hired. She'd never missed a shift in 3 years, not even when Isabella had the flu last winter, and Maria had to bring her along, setting up a makeshift bed in one of the back booths while she mopped and scrubbed. As she approached the diner's back alley, Maria noticed a figure huddled against a brick wall near the dumpster. In the dim light from the street lamp, she could make out a young man, maybe 17 or 18, wearing a thin jacket that looked like it had seen better days. His dark hair was messy, and even from a distance, she could see he was shivering. Maria paused, her hand on the key ring. She'd seen homeless people in the alley before, usually passing through, sometimes looking for food in the dumpster. Frank had strict rules about not encouraging loiterers, but something about this boy struck her differently. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, not rummaging through garbage or causing trouble, just trying to find shelter from the wind. She unlocked the back door and slipped inside, flipping on the lights in the kitchen. The familiar smell of grease and coffee grounds greeted her, along with the sight of dishes stacked in the sink and floors that needed attention. But before she started her routine, Maria found herself looking out the small window that faced the alley. The boy hadn't moved. Without really thinking about it, she opened the industrial refrigerator and pulled out the brown paper bag that contained her dinner, a turkey sandwich she'd made with the last of the lunch meat from their weekly grocery trip. Isabella had eaten spaghetti with butter for dinner, her favorite simple meal, and Maria had planned to eat her sandwich during her break around midnight. But looking at that figure in the alley, she couldn't shake the feeling that he needed it more than she did. Maria wrapped the sandwich in a clean kitchen towel and grabbed a paper cup, filling it with hot coffee from the pot Frank always left on for the night staff. She added extra sugar and a generous splash of cream, the way Isabella liked it, thinking that if this boy was as young as he looked, he might appreciate the sweetness. The cold air hit her face as she stepped into the alley, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the December night. The boy looked up as she approached, his eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been fear. Up close, she could see he was indeed young, with olive skin and dark eyes that held too much weariness for someone his age. "Hey there," Maria said softly, her voice carrying the slight accent she'd never quite lost despite 20 years in America. "You look cold. I brought you something to eat." The boy stared at her for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. I don't have any money," he stammered, his teeth chattering slightly. "Did I ask for money?" Maria smiled, extending the sandwich and coffee toward him. "Everybody needs to eat. That's not about money, that's about being human." He reached out tentatively and took the food, his hand shaking slightly, though whether from cold or something else, Maria couldn't tell. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I really appreciate this. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. What's your name? Maria asked, settling down on an overturned milk crate a few feet away from him. She knew she should go inside and start her work, but something kept her there in the cold alley. David, he said, unwrapping the sandwich with careful hands, as if it were something precious. David Rodriguez. I'm Maria Santos. She watched as he took his first bite, the way his eyes closed with relief and gratitude. Where are you from, David? He chewed slowly, making the food last. Originally from San Antonio, but I've been moving around a lot lately. He took a sip of the coffee and sighed with pleasure. This is really good. Thank you, Mrs. Santos. Just Maria is fine. She studied his face in the dim light, noting the intelligence in his eyes despite his circumstances. You're young to be out here on your own. Do you have family? David's expression grew guarded. It's complicated. My mom, she passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. And my stepdad, let's just say we didn't get along after that. I've been trying to make it on my own, but it's harder than I thought it would be. Maria felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. She thought of Isabella, asleep in their tiny apartment, and couldn't imagine her daughter facing the world alone at such a young age. Are you trying to get somewhere specific? I was hoping to get to Portland. I have a cousin there who said I could stay with him while I finish high school, maybe find some work. David finished the last bite of sandwich and held the empty coffee cup between his hands, savoring the warmth. But my bus ticket money got stolen in Chicago, and I've been trying to earn enough to get back on the road. How long have you been in Millbrook? 3 days. I was hoping to find some day labor, maybe washing dishes or something, but most places want references or a permanent address. He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but Maria could see the defeat in his shoulders. Maria glanced at her watch and realized she'd been outside for nearly 20 minutes. Frank didn't usually check on the cleaning crew, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. I have to go back to work now, she said, standing up. But listen, if you're still here tomorrow night, I'll bring you something else to eat, okay? David looked up at her with surprise. You don't have to do that. You've already been so kind. I want to, Maria said simply. Everyone deserves a chance, and everyone deserves not to go hungry. She paused at the back door. Be safe out here, David, and if anyone gives you trouble, you just bang on this door, okay? I'll be here until 6 in the morning. Inside the diner, Maria threw herself into her work with extra energy, as if physical labor could quiet the thoughts spinning in her head. She scrubbed the grill until it gleamed, mopped the floors twice, and cleaned the windows until they sparkled. All the while, she thought about David in the alley, about Isabella sleeping safely upstairs, about the precarious line between security and disaster that seemed to define so many lives. When she took her official break at midnight, Maria found herself looking out the window again. David was still there, now wrapped in what looked like a piece of cardboard he'd found, trying to sleep despite the cold. Without hesitation, she went to the staff closet and pulled out one of the spare aprons, a thick canvas thing that might provide a little extra warmth. She also filled another cup with coffee and grabbed the leftover dinner roll from the kitchen. This time, David was awake when she approached. I told you I'd come back, she said, handing him the coffee and roll. You really didn't have to, he said, but his grateful smile said otherwise. And this, he held up the apron, this is perfect, thank you. They talked for a few more minutes, and Maria learned that David had been an honor student before his life fell apart, that he loved to read and had dreams of maybe going to college someday. There was something about his quiet determination that reminded her of herself at that age, newly arrived from El Salvador, with nothing but hope and a willingness to work hard. Over the next week, their midnight meetings became routine. Maria would bring David food and hot coffee, and they would talk for 10 or 15 minutes before she had to return to her work. She learned that he spent his days looking for work, that he'd managed to earn a few dollars helping an elderly man clean out his garage, that he was slowly saving money for that bus ticket to Portland. On the 7th night, David wasn't in his usual spot by the dumpster. Maria felt a strange pang of disappointment and worry. Had something happened to him? Had he finally earned enough money to leave? She found herself hoping it was the latter, even though she realized she'd grown to look forward to their brief conversations. But on the 8th night, he was back, and Maria could immediately see that something was different. There was a brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, an energy that spoke of good news. "Maria," he said, as she approached with his usual coffee and whatever food she'd managed to bring. "I got a job. A real job." "That's wonderful." Maria set the coffee down and clapped her hands together. "Tell me everything." "You remember Mr. Patterson, the man whose garage I cleaned out? Well, he owns a small construction company, and one of his workers quit unexpectedly. He offered me a position as a helper, minimum wage to start, but with the possibility of learning the trade and moving up." "Ah!" David's words came out in a rush, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "It's not permanent," he was clear about that, "but it's enough to get me back on my feet." "And the bus ticket to Portland?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the thing. Mr. Patterson said if I prove myself over the next few months, he might have longer-term work for me. I'm thinking maybe I should stay in Millbrook for a while, at least through the winter. Portland will still be there in the spring." Maria felt a mix of emotions, happiness for David's opportunity, and a selfish pleasure that he wouldn't be leaving just yet. "Where will you stay?" "Mr. Patterson knows a boarding house where some of his workers rent rooms. It's not fancy, but it's warm and clean, and the price is reasonable." David paused, looking at Maria with an expression of deep gratitude. "I need to tell you something. These past 8 nights, the food you've brought me, the kindness you've shown, it kept me going when I was ready to give up. I was seriously considering hitchhiking out of town, maybe even going back to San Antonio and dealing with my stepdad, even though I knew that wouldn't end well." "You don't need to thank me," Maria began, but David held up his hand. "Yes, I do. You didn't know me from anyone, but you saw someone who needed help and you helped. No questions, no judgment, just human kindness. I want you to know that I'll never forget that. And someday, when I'm in a position to help someone else, I'm going to remember what you taught me." Maria felt tears prick at her eyes. "You're a good person, David Rodriguez. Whatever challenges you face, don't forget that. Good people make it through, they find their way. I hope you're right." David stood up, looking more confident than she'd ever seen him. "I start work tomorrow, so I won't be here tomorrow night. But I'd like to stay in touch, if that's okay. Maybe I could take you and your daughter out for dinner sometime, when I get my first paycheck." "I'd like that," Maria said, and she meant it. "Isabella would love to meet you. She's always asking me why I'm in such a good mood when I come home these days." They exchanged phone numbers, and Maria watched as David gathered his few possessions, including the apron she'd given him that first night. "Keep that," she said, when she saw him folding it carefully. A reminder that there are always people willing to help. For the next few months, David and Maria stayed in touch. True to his word, he took her and Isabella out for pizza once he'd received his first paycheck, and Maria was delighted to see how well he got along with her daughter. Isabella, always mature for her 8 years, seemed to sense that David was someone special, someone who understood what it meant to struggle and persevere. David threw himself into his construction work with the same determination he'd shown in surviving on the streets. Mr. Patterson was impressed with his work ethic and his eagerness to learn, and within 3 months, David had been promoted from helper to apprentice, with a corresponding increase in pay. He moved from the boarding house to a small apartment, nothing fancy, but a place he could call his own. As winter turned to spring, David's life continued to improve. He enrolled in night classes at the community college, determined to earn his high school diploma and maybe even pursue some technical training. He and Maria developed a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and the shared understanding of what it meant to fight for every opportunity. But as often happens in life, just as things were looking up for David, Maria's world began to shift. The textile factory where she'd worked for 7 years before taking the night cleaning job had been bought by a larger company, and rumors were circulating that they were planning to close the Millbrook facility and move operations overseas. Maria had been hoping to eventually return to factory work, which paid better than cleaning, but now that seemed impossible. Worse, Isabella had been having problems at school. Not behavioral problems, she was too well behaved for that, but academic struggles that the teachers attributed to exhaustion. Isabella was often tired during the day because she sometimes had to wait up late for Maria to come home from her night shift, and the irregular schedule was taking its toll. "I need to find day work," Maria confided to David one evening as they sat in her small apartment, sharing a simple dinner of rice and beans, while Isabella did homework at the kitchen table. "Isabella needs more stability, a more normal schedule. But day jobs that pay enough for us to live on are hard to find without a college degree." David had been thinking about Maria's situation for weeks, watching her struggle with the impossible balance of being a single mother while trying to earn enough to support herself and her daughter. He'd been wanting to help, to give back some of the kindness she'd shown him, but he also knew that Maria was proud and wouldn't accept charity. "What if I talk to Mr. Patterson?" he suggested. "His company has been growing, and I know he's been talking about needing someone to help with the office work, scheduling, maybe some basic bookkeeping. You're smart, you're reliable, and I could vouch for you." Maria looked up from her plate, hope flickering in her eyes. "Do you really think he might be interested? I don't have experience with construction, but I'm good with numbers, and I learn fast. I think it's worth asking. The worst he can say is no. And Mr. Patterson isn't the kind of man who would hold it against me for asking." The next day, David approached his boss during their lunch break. Patterson Construction had grown from a small operation to a mid-sized company over the past year, and Jim Patterson was indeed feeling overwhelmed by the administrative side of the business. When David explained Maria's situation, careful to emphasize her reliability and work ethic rather than her need for help, Patterson was intrigued. "Bring her by tomorrow after work," he said. "I'll talk to her, see if she might be a good fit. I can't promise anything, but we do need help in the office." Maria was nervous about the interview, but she needn't have been. Jim Patterson was a straightforward man who valued honesty and hard work above formal credentials. He was impressed by Maria's thoughtful answers to his questions and her obvious intelligence. More importantly, David's recommendation carried weight. In the months since hiring the young man, Patterson had come to rely on his judgment and work ethic. "The job would be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, Patterson explained. "Basic office work to start, answering phones, scheduling jobs, keeping track of materials and inventory. The pay is $12 an hour to start, with the possibility of raises based on performance. Health, insurance after 90 days. Maria felt her heart racing. $12 an hour was more than she made cleaning, and day shift hours would mean she could be home with Isabella in the evenings, help with homework, be the kind of mother she'd always wanted to be, but couldn't afford to be. "When would you need me to start?" she asked, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "How about Monday? That gives you the weekend to make arrangements with your current job." Walking out of Patterson Construction that Thursday afternoon, Maria felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time since Isabella's father had left them, she could see a path forward that didn't involve constant struggle and worry. Frank Rosenberg was disappointed to lose his most reliable cleaner, but he understood Maria's need to take the day job. "You've been the best worker I've ever had," he told her, as she cleaned Rosie's diner for the last time. "If things don't work out, you've always got a place here." Maria's new life began that Monday morning. The office work at Patterson Construction was different from anything she'd done before, but she approached it with the same determination that had carried her through years of night shifts and single parenthood. She learned the computer system, mastered the scheduling software, and quickly became indispensable to the daily operations of the business. More importantly, the new schedule transformed her relationship with Isabella. For the first time in years, Maria was home for dinner, able to help with homework, available for school events and parent-teacher conferences. Isabella's grades improved dramatically, and the exhaustion that had marked her young face began to fade. David watched Maria's transformation with deep satisfaction. In helping her find the job, he felt he'd been able to repay, at least in part, the kindness she'd shown him during his darkest days. But he also began to realize that his feelings for Maria had grown beyond gratitude and friendship into something deeper. It started slowly. The awareness that he looked forward to their conversations more than anything else in his day, that he found excuses to stop by the Patterson construction office, just to see her smile. Maria, for her part, had also begun to notice the way her heart lifted when David walked through the door. The way their conversations seemed to flow effortlessly from practical matters to deeper thoughts about life and dreams and the future. But both of them were cautious. Marie's experience with Isabella's father had left her wary of romantic relationships, especially with someone younger than herself. David, meanwhile, was acutely aware of the debt he owed Maria and worried that his feelings might be misinterpreted as an attempt to repay her kindness. The turning point came on a Saturday in late spring, nearly 6 months after Maria had started working at Patterson Construction. David had offered to help her move some furniture she'd bought at a garage sale, and afterwards, they'd taken Isabella to the park. Watching David push her daughter on the swings, seeing Isabella's delighted laughter and the gentle patience in David's eyes, Maria felt her carefully maintained emotional walls begin to crumble. "He likes you," Isabella announced that evening as Maria tucked her into bed. "And you like him too, I can tell." "What makes you say that?" Maria asked, though she suspected her feelings had become more obvious than she'd intended. "You smile different when he's around. Like when you're really happy, not just pretending to be happy." Isabella's 8-year-old wisdom sometimes startled Maria with its accuracy. "And he looks at you like Prince Eric looks at Ariel in The Little Mermaid." Maria laughed despite herself. "That's quite an observation, mija. Are you going to marry him?" The question hung in the air between them, innocent and direct in the way that only children can manage. "I don't know," Maria answered honestly. "These things are complicated when you're a grown-up." "I think you should," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "He makes you happy, and he's nice to me, and he knows how to fix things. Those are all good things in a husband." That night, as Maria lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about Isabella's words and about the changes in her life over the past year. She thought about David, about the man he'd become since that cold December night when she'd first found him in the alley. He was 22 now, still young, but there was a maturity in him, born of hardship and determination that belied his age. The next Sunday, David asked Maria and Isabella to join him for a picnic by the lake. It was a perfect spring day, warm and sunny, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowering trees. They spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the lunch David had prepared, simple sandwiches and fruit, but it felt like a feast. After they'd eaten, Isabella wandered off to explore the shoreline, collecting interesting rocks and shells, giving the adults a chance to talk privately. David had been unusually quiet during lunch, and Maria could sense there was something on Barres. His mind. Maria, he began, then stopped, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you'll hear me out before you say anything." She nodded, her heart beginning to race with anticipation and worry. "I know that what I'm about to say might complicate things between us, and I know that I owe you so much already that it might seem inappropriate, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." David took a deep breath, his dark eyes serious and intent. "I'm in love with you, Maria. Not because of what you did for me, not out of gratitude, but because of who you are, because of your kindness and your strength, and the way you love Isabella, and the way you make me want to be a better man." Maria felt her breath catch in her throat, the words she'd been hoping to hear and afraid to hope for at the same time. "I know I'm younger than you," David continued, "and I know I don't have much to offer yet. But I'm working hard, I'm saving money, and I'm planning for the future. I want to go to college, maybe study business or engineering. I want to build something, to become someone worthy of you and Isabella." "David," Maria began, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish, please. I know this might change things between us, and if you can't see me as anything more than a friend, I'll understand. But I had to tell you how I feel, because keeping it inside was driving me crazy." Maria looked at this young man who had come into her life as a hungry teenager and grown into someone she respected and cared for more than she'd allowed herself to admit. She thought about Isabella's words, about the way her heart lifted when she saw him, about the future she'd begun to imagine despite her efforts not to. "David Rodriguez," she said softly, reaching out to take his hand. "I have been falling in love with you for months, and I've been fighting it every step of the way because I was scared." His eyes widened with hope and disbelief. "Scared of what?" "Scared that it was too good to be true. Scared that you were too young, that I was too old, that we came from such different places that it couldn't work. Scared that I was reading too much into kindness and friendship." Maria squeezed his hand. "But mostly scared because Isabella is already attached to you, and if this didn't work out, it would break her heart as much as mine." "And now?" Maria looked across the lake to where Isabella was wading in the shallow water, her jeans rolled up to her knees, her face bright with joy. "Now I think maybe being scared isn't a good enough reason to miss out on something." "Beautiful." David's smile was radiant as he leaned across the blanket to kiss her, gentle and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as Maria responded. When they broke apart, Isabella was standing a few feet away, grinning broadly. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family?" she asked with the directness that never failed to amaze her mother. "What do you think about that?" David asked seriously, treating her question with the respect it deserved. "I think it's about time," Isabella declared, and ran to throw her arms around both of them. The next 2 years passed like a dream. David continued to excel at Patterson Construction while taking evening classes at the community college. Maria was promoted to office manager, with a salary increase that allowed them to move to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood. Isabella flourished in her new school, making friends and discovering a talent for art that no one had suspected. Most importantly, they became a family in every way that mattered. David's proposal came on the 2nd anniversary of their first kiss by the lake, a simple but heartfelt speech that reduced both Maria and Isabella to happy tears. The wedding was small, held in the community center with Jim Patterson walking Maria down the aisle and Isabella serving as maid of honor. David legally adopted Isabella shortly after the wedding, a process that involved more paperwork than emotion but meant the world to all three of them. "Isabella Rodriguez," she wrote on her school papers now, and the pride in her voice when she introduced David as her dad was unmistakable. But even as their personal lives flourished, changes were happening in Millbrook that would test their newly found happiness. The economic downturn that had started with the textile factory closure was spreading throughout the community. Several long-time businesses had closed, and even thriving establishments were feeling the pressure. Rosie's Diner, where Maria had first found David on that cold December night, was struggling. Frank Rosenberg, now in his 70s, was finding it harder to keep up with the demands of running a restaurant. The building needed repairs he couldn't afford, business was down, and he was seriously considering retirement. Maria learned about Frank's difficulties when she stopped by the diner for coffee one afternoon, something she did occasionally out of nostalgia and affection for her former boss. The place looked tired, she noticed, the floors that she used to scrub nightly now showing their age, the vinyl booths cracked and faded. "I hate to see it go," Frank told her, as she sat at the counter, sipping coffee that tasted exactly the same as it had 3 years ago. "This place has been my life for 30 years. But I can't keep throwing good money after bad, and I'm too old to start over somewhere else. What will happen to the building?" Frank shrugged. "I'm renting it from a property management company. They'll find another tenant, I suppose, or maybe tear it down and build something else. That's the way things go these days." Driving home that afternoon, Maria felt a deep sadness at the thought of Rosie's Diner disappearing. It wasn't just sentimentality, though the place held special memories for her. The diner served a purpose in the community, providing affordable meals and a gathering place for people who didn't have many other options. That evening, she told David about her conversation with Frank. "I keep thinking there should be something we can do," she said as they cleaned up after dinner, Isabella already settled at the kitchen table with her homework. "Maybe not save the diner exactly, but preserve what it represents." David had been thinking along similar lines. His construction work had given him insights into the local business community, and he'd observed the same economic pressures that were affecting the diner. What if someone bought the building and kept it as a restaurant? He mused. Someone who understood its value to the community. "Do you know anyone with that kind of money?" "Not exactly," David admitted. "But I've been saving money, and I've been thinking about the future, about what I want to do with my life beyond construction work." He paused, looking at Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. What would you think about us trying to buy the diner? Maria stared at him in surprise. Us? David, we don't know anything about running a restaurant. We could learn. You're brilliant with organization and management. I know construction and could handle the repairs and maintenance. We both understand hard work and customer service. David's enthusiasm was growing as he spoke. And think about it, Maria. That place brought us together. Maybe it's meant to be part of our story. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Maria had never imagined herself as a business owner, had always seen herself as someone who worked for others, not someone who created jobs and took financial risks. But as she thought about it over the next few days, the possibility began to seem less impossible. David, meanwhile, had begun researching the financial aspects of buying the building and running a restaurant. The numbers were daunting, but not impossible. Between his savings and Maria's, plus a small business loan, they might be able to make it work. The key would be keeping their overhead low while building a customer base. We have to start small, he explained to Maria and Isabella one evening, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Keep the menu simple, do most of the work ourselves at first. But if we can make it through the first 2 years, establish ourselves in the community, we could build something really special. Isabella, now 11, and increasingly interested in her parents' plans and dreams, looked up from her math homework. Could I help? I mean, when I'm older? If you want to, Maria said, touched by her daughter's eagerness to be part of their vision. But remember, running a business is hard work, lots of long hours and stress. I don't mind hard work, Isabella said seriously. And besides, it would be our place, our family business. That's different from just working for someone else. Over the next several weeks, David and Maria threw themselves into researching every aspect of restaurant ownership. They visited other small diners in nearby towns, talked to business owners about the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship, and spent hours with calculators and spreadsheets, trying to project costs and revenues. The more they learned, the more convinced they became that they could make it work. Not easily, and not without significant sacrifice and risk. But it was possible. The location was good, the building structure was sound despite needing cosmetic improvements, and there was clearly a market for affordable quality food in downtown Millbrook. The biggest challenge was financing. Even with their combined savings and the prospect of a small business loan, they would be cutting things very close. They would have to keep their day jobs initially, running the diner in the evenings and on weekends until it became profitable enough to support them full-time. Frank Rosenberg was thrilled when they approached him with their proposal. I was hoping someone local would take it over, he said, his lined face creased with pleasure. You two understand what this place means to people. You'll take care of it. The property management company was less sentimental, but equally pleased to have serious buyers. The building had been on the market for months without attracting interest, and David and Maria's offer, while not high, was solid and backed by realistic financing. The closing took place on a sunny morning in October, 3 years after David and Maria's wedding. As they signed the final papers, transferring ownership of the building that housed Rosie's Diner to Rodriguez Family Enterprises, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded her of the day Isabella was born, the sense of taking responsibility for something precious and fragile. The first few months of ownership were overwhelming. David and Maria kept their day jobs, spending evenings and weekends cleaning, painting, and making repairs to bring the diner up to their standards. Isabella helped after school and on weekends, showing an aptitude for organization and customer service that surprised and pleased her parents. They decided to keep the name Rosie's Diner, both out of respect for its history and because it was already established in the community. But they made significant changes to the menu, focusing on fresh, locally sourced ingredients and traditional comfort food prepared with care and attention to quality. The grand reopening took place on a cold Saturday morning in December, exactly 4 years after Maria had first encountered David in the alley behind the building. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was David's way of honoring the moment that had changed both their lives. The response from the community exceeded their most optimistic projections. Word had spread about the young family that had bought the old diner, and people were curious to see what they'd done with the place. The dining room was packed from opening to closing, with a line of customers waiting for tables during the lunch rush. Maria worked the front of the house, taking orders and serving customers with the same attention to detail she'd brought to every job she'd ever held. David ran the kitchen, cooking with a passion and skill that surprised even him. Isabella bussed tables and helped with seating, charming customers with her friendly efficiency and obvious pride in her family's accomplishment. By closing time that first day, they were exhausted but exhilarated. The cash register showed numbers that exceeded their projections, and more importantly, the feedback from customers had been overwhelmingly positive. People weren't just eating at Rosie's diner, they were celebrating it, claiming it as their own community gathering place. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. Word of mouth brought new customers, while satisfied diners became regulars. David quit his construction job to focus full-time on the restaurant, while Maria continued working part-time at Patterson Construction, gradually reducing her hours as the diner's success allowed. The success, however, came with challenges they hadn't anticipated. The long hours and constant pressure of running a business tested their marriage in ways they hadn't expected. There were arguments about money, about staffing, about the direction they wanted the business to take. There were nights when they fell into bed exhausted, too tired to do more than mumble goodnight to each other. But there were also moments of profound satisfaction, watching regular customers greet each other like old friends across the dining room, seeing elderly customers light up when Isabella remembered their usual orders, receiving handwritten thank you notes from families who had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries at their tables. The diner became more than just a business. It became a cornerstone of the community. During the harsh winter months, they started a program where customers could pay for extra meals that would be given to anyone who needed them, no questions asked. The program grew organically, with regular customers adding extra dollars to their bills to support neighbors going through hard times. Isabella, now 13 and more involved in the business than ever, suggested they start hosting community events. "We have the space in the evenings," she pointed out during one of their weekly family business meetings. "We could have book clubs, or maybe let local musicians perform on weekends." The idea proved brilliant. Soon, Rosie's Diner was hosting everything from high school fundraisers to retirement parties. Local artists displayed their work on the walls, rotating exhibitions that brought new customers and gave the space a constantly evolving character. The diner became a cultural hub, as much as a place to eat. As the business grew more successful, David and Maria were able to hire additional staff, which relieved some of the pressure on their family time. They brought in Carmen, an experienced cook who had worked at restaurants in the city before moving to Millbrook to be closer to her grandchildren. They also hired 2 part-time servers, both college students who appreciated the flexible scheduling and family atmosphere. The financial success allowed them to make improvements to the building. They renovated the kitchen with modern equipment, expanded the dining room by converting unused storage space, and created a small private dining area for special events. Each improvement was carefully planned and executed, reflecting their commitment to building something that would last. But success also brought unexpected challenges. Other restaurants in the area, struggling with their own financial difficulties, began to resent Rosie's Diner's popularity. There were complaints to the city council about parking, noise, and unfair competition. A few established business owners suggested that the Rodriguez family was receiving preferential treatment or had access to funding that others didn't. The criticism stung, particularly because David and Maria knew how hard they'd worked and how much they'd sacrificed to build their business. But they responded with characteristic grace, attending city council meetings to address concerns, working with neighboring businesses to find mutually beneficial solutions, and maintaining their focus on excellent service and community contribution. Isabella, now in high school and increasingly mature, became an unofficial ambassador for the family business. She spoke at school events about entrepreneurship and community service, and her obvious pride in her parents' accomplishments helped counter some of the negative commentary. Her friends frequently gathered at the diner after school, and their parents often followed, expanding the customer base to include younger families. The diner's 5th anniversary celebration was a milestone that none of them could have imagined when they first signed the purchase papers. The event filled not just the restaurant but spilled out into the street, with local musicians, food vendors, and community groups participating in what had become an annual festival. Standing in the crowded dining room that night, watching her husband work the room with easy confidence, and her daughter coordinate volunteers with natural leadership skills, Maria felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not just for their success, but for the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about that cold December night 9 years ago, when she'd given her last sandwich to a hungry teenager in the alley behind this very building. She thought about the woman she'd been then, working nights and struggling to provide for her daughter, never imagining that she could own a business or build something that would benefit an entire community. David found her during a quiet moment, slipping his arm around her waist as they watched Isabella give a toast to the crowd, thanking everyone for their support over the years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noting the contemplative expression on her face. "Just remembering," Maria replied. "Thinking about how far we've all come. Any regrets?" Maria considered the question seriously. The past 9 years had been filled with challenges, sacrifices, and moments of doubt. They'd worked harder than most people could imagine, taken risks that had kept them awake at night, and faced criticism and setbacks that had tested their resolve. "No regrets," she said finally. "Not about any of it. This life, this family, this business, it's all been worth every struggle." David squeezed her hand. "I love you, Maria Rodriguez. Thank you for believing in us, in all of this. Thank you for giving me something to believe in." As the celebration continued around them, Maria and David began to talk about the future. Isabella would be graduating from high school in 2 years, and she'd expressed interest in studying business in college, with the goal of eventually taking over the family restaurant. But they also wanted her to have choices, to explore the world beyond Millbrook, if that's what she chose. "Whatever she decides," David said, "we'll support her. This business will always be here for her if she wants it, but it shouldn't be a burden or an obligation." They'd also been discussing expansion possibilities. Not necessarily opening another location, but perhaps catering services or a small retail line of their signature sauces and baked goods. The key was to grow in ways that maintain the personal touch and community connection that had made Rosie's Diner successful. But those were conversations for another day. Tonight was about celebration, about recognizing how far they'd come and appreciating the community that had embraced them. As the evening wound down and the last customers headed home, the Rodriguez family worked together to clean up, the same teamwork that had carried them through every challenge. Isabella, now 17 and poised to graduate as valedictorian of her high school class, paused in her sweeping to look around the dining room. "Mom? Dad? I've been thinking about something." "What's that, mija?" Maria asked, hanging up the last of the freshly washed aprons. "I know I've said I want to study business and maybe take over the restaurant someday, but I've been wondering if that's really what I want, or if it's just what I think you want me to want." David and Maria exchanged glances. They'd been hoping Isabella would choose her own path, but they also couldn't deny that the idea of keeping the restaurant in the family held strong appeal. "Tell us what you're thinking," David said, settling into one of the booths and patting the seat beside him. Isabella joined them, her expression serious but not troubled. "I love this place. I love what we've built together, and I'm proud of what our family has accomplished. But I also think I want to see more of the world before I decide what I want to do with my life." "That's completely understandable," Maria said. "What are you considering?" "I've been accepted to several colleges, but I'm most interested in the International Business program at the State University. They have study abroad opportunities, internships with companies around the world, and I think the experience would help me become a better businesswoman, whether I come back to run the restaurant or do something else entirely." David felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. He wanted Isabella to have every opportunity, but he also couldn't help worrying about her leaving their small community for the wider world. "What about the restaurant?" he asked. "We always planned that you'd gradually take on more responsibility as you got older. I think the restaurant will be fine," Isabella said with a confidence that reminded Maria of her own determination at that age. "You two built something amazing, and it doesn't depend on me to keep being amazing. If I decide to come back after college, after I've learned more about business and seen more of the world, I'll be able to contribute more than I could now." Maria reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. I think that's very wise. Your father and I want you to follow your dreams, wherever they lead. Even if they lead away from Millbrook? Even then, David said, though his voice caught slightly. We'll miss you terribly, but we'll be proud of you no matter what you choose to do. Isabella's departure for college the following fall was harder than any of them had anticipated. The restaurant felt different without her presence. Quieter and, somehow, less complete. But the letters and calls they received from her were filled with excitement about her classes, her new friends, and the opportunities she was discovering. During her sophomore year, Isabella spent a semester studying in Costa Rica, learning about sustainable agriculture and fair trade practices. Her letters from that period were filled with ideas about how small businesses could make a positive impact on their communities and the world. I'm learning so much, she wrote in one particularly long letter, not just about business, but about how food connects people, how restaurants can be more than just places to eat. I think about Rosie's Diner and realize that you and Dad were already doing many of these things intuitively. The letter continued with detailed descriptions of family-owned restaurants she'd visited, each one reflecting the culture and values of its community. I'm starting to understand that what makes a restaurant special isn't just the food, it's the story behind it, the relationships it creates, the way it serves its community. David and Maria were touched by Isabella's insights, but also impressed by her growing sophistication and worldliness. The young woman who wrote these letters was different from the teenager who had left Millbrook, more confident and articulate, with a broader perspective on the world. Meanwhile, Rosie's Diner continued to thrive. The community had fully embraced the restaurant as their own, and the steady stream of regular customers provided a reliable foundation for the business. David and Maria had settled down into a comfortable rhythm, managing the restaurant while also making time for their marriage and their own interests. David had started teaching a small business class at the community college, sharing the lessons he'd learned from building the restaurant. Maria had joined the city council, using her experience as a business owner to help guide local economic development efforts. Both of them found satisfaction in giving back to the community that had supported them. During Isabella's junior year, she called with news that both excited and concerned her parents. She'd been offered an internship with an international development organization, working on projects to help small businesses in developing countries access capital, markets, and funding. It's exactly the kind of work I want to do, she explained during their weekly video call. But it would mean spending the summer in Guatemala, instead of coming home to work at the restaurant. That sounds like an incredible opportunity, Maria said, though she couldn't hide her disappointment at the prospect of not seeing Isabella for the entire summer. I know you were counting on my help during the busy season, Isabella continued, and I hate to leave you short-staffed. We'll manage, David assured her. This is the kind of experience that could shape your entire career. You have to take it. The summer without Isabella was challenging operationally, but it also gave David and Maria a chance to rediscover their partnership in running the restaurant. They hired additional temporary staff and adjusted their schedules to cover Isabella's usual responsibilities. But they also found themselves working more closely together than they had in years. Isabella's letters from Guatemala were filled with stories of small farmers and restaurant owners who are working to build sustainable businesses in challenging economic conditions. She wrote about a woman who had started a small restaurant in her village, serving traditional foods to tourists and locals alike, and how the business had grown to employ several other women from the community. Her story reminds me so much of yours, Mom, Isabella wrote. She started with almost nothing, just determination and a willingness to work hard. Now she's not just supporting her own family, but creating opportunities for others. The parallel wasn't lost on Maria. She thought about her own journey from that struggling single mother working night shifts to a successful business owner and community leader. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. Isabella returned from Guatemala with a new sense of purpose and direction. She'd decided to major in international development with a focus on sustainable business practices, and she was already making plans for graduate school and a career in nonprofit work. I want to help other people build what you and Dad built, she explained during her first dinner back at Rosie's Diner. I want to work with communities to develop businesses that serve their needs while also creating economic opportunities. That sounds wonderful, David said. But what about the restaurant? We always thought you might want to take it over someday. Isabella smiled. I do want to be involved with the restaurant, but maybe in a different way than we originally planned. What if we used Rosie's Diner as a model for the kind of community-centered business I want to help create in other places? What if we documented what you've done here and turned it into a blueprint that other communities could adapt? The idea intrigued both David and Maria. They'd never thought of their restaurant as a model for anything, but as Isabella talked about her vision, they began to see how their experience could be valuable to others facing similar challenges. Over the next few months, Isabella worked with her parents to document the history of Rosie's Diner. From the night Maria first fed David in the alley to the thriving community hub it had become. She interviewed regular customers, staff members, and local business owners about the restaurant's impact on the community. The project became Isabella's senior thesis, a comprehensive case study of how a small, family-owned restaurant could serve as a catalyst for community development. Her professors were impressed by the depth of her research and the practical applications of her findings. But the thesis was just the beginning. Isabella had bigger plans for the project, plans that would take the story of Rosie's Diner far beyond the borders of Millbrook. After graduation, Isabella moved back home temporarily while she applied for graduate programs and fellowships. She spent her days working at the Y restaurant and her evenings developing a nonprofit organization focused on supporting community-based businesses in underserved areas. I want to call it the Rosie's Foundation, she told her parents one evening as they sat in the empty restaurant after closing. With your permission, of course. David and Maria were overwhelmed by the honor. The idea that their little restaurant could inspire a foundation dedicated to helping others build similar businesses was beyond anything they'd ever imagined. We'd be honored, Maria said, tears in her eyes. But are you sure this is what you want to do? It's a big responsibility, starting a foundation. I'm sure, Isabella replied, with the confidence that had marked her approach to every major decision. This is how I want to use what I've learned, both from my education and from growing up in this family. I want to help other people have the same opportunities you've given me. The Rosie's Foundation officially launched on the 10th anniversary of the restaurant's reopening. The celebration was even larger than previous years, with representatives from nonprofit organizations, small business development groups, and government agencies joining the usual crowd of local supporters. Isabella gave a speech that evening, standing in the same dining room where she'd grown up, surrounded by the people who had shaped her understanding of community and service. 10 years ago, my parents took a leap of faith, she began. They bought this building and committed themselves to creating not just a business, but a gathering place for our community. They didn't set out to become role models or community leaders. They just wanted to provide good food and honest service. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had become extended family over the years. But what they built here is bigger than they ever imagined. Rosie's Diner isn't just a restaurant. It's proof that small businesses can be forces for positive change, that entrepreneurs can create value that goes far beyond profit, that communities can support each other in ways that make everyone stronger. The applause was thunderous, but Isabella wasn't finished. The Rosie's Foundation will work to help other communities create their own versions of what we have here. Not exact copies, because every community is different, but businesses that reflect the same values of service, quality, and community connection that have made this place special. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Maria found herself standing in the same spot where she'd contemplated her journey 5 years earlier. But now, instead of just looking back, she was looking forward to the future her daughter was creating. David joined her, and together they watched Isabella saying goodbye to guests, clearly energized by the positive response to her foundation announcement. She's going to change the world, David said quietly. She already has, Maria replied. She's changed ours. The years that followed brought new challenges and opportunities. The Rosie's Foundation grew from Isabella's vision into a respected organization that provided technical assistance, microloans, and mentorship to entrepreneurs in underserved communities. Isabella traveled frequently, working with business owners from rural Appalachia to inner-city Detroit. But she always returned to Millbrook and the restaurant that had inspired her mission. David and Maria, now in their 50s, had settled into a comfortable rhythm of managing the restaurant while supporting Isabella's broader work. The diner remained the heart of their lives, but they also took pride in knowing that their story was inspiring similar successes in communities across the country. Regular customers had become close friends, watching their children grow up in the restaurant's dining room, celebrating milestones and mourning losses together. The restaurant had become a repository of community memory, a place where stories were told and retold, where traditions were maintained and new ones created. On a cold December evening, 15 years after that first night when Maria had given her sandwich to a hungry teenager, the restaurant was bustling with its usual dinner crowd. Maria was seating a family of tourists who had heard about Rosie's diner from friends, while David worked in the kitchen preparing orders with the same attention to detail he'd brought to every meal for the past decade. Isabella was there too, home from a foundation trip to help a group of refugee women start a catering business. She moved through the dining room with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups and chatting with customers who had watched her grow up. As the evening rush began to slow, Maria found herself pausing to appreciate the scene around her. The dining room was filled with conversation and laughter, the comfortable sounds of a community gathering place. At one table, a group of high school students were studying for exams while sharing a plate of fries. At another, an elderly couple was celebrating their anniversary with the same meal they'd ordered on their first date 50 years earlier. This was what they'd built, Maria realized. Not just a business, but a place where people could feel connected to each other and to something larger than themselves. A place where kindness was the foundation of every interaction, where success was measured not just in profit, but in the positive impact on the community. The teenager sleeping in the alley 15 years ago had become a successful businessman. Devoted father, the struggling single mother had become a respected community leader and mentor to other entrepreneurs. The scared little girl who had worried about her mother working nights had become a confident young woman dedicated to helping others achieve their dreams. As Maria looked around the dining room one more time, before heading to the kitchen to help with closing duties, she noticed a young man sitting alone at a corner booth. He looked tired and worried, and something about his posture reminded her of David all those years ago. Without thinking about it, Maria approached his table. "How are you doing tonight?" she asked gently. The young man looked up, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "I'm okay," he said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you sure? You look like you could use a friend." For a moment, the young man's carefully maintained composure cracked. "I'm just going through a rough patch," he admitted. "Lost my job last week, and I'm trying to figure out what to do next." Maria sat down across from him. "What kind of work do you do?" "I was a line cook at a place downtown, but they had to let several people go. The owner said business has been slow." He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I'll find something else. It's just taking longer than I expected." "Have you eaten today?" The question seemed to surprise him. I had some coffee this morning." Without another word, Maria stood up and walked to the kitchen. She returned a few minutes later with a plate of their signature meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, along with a slice of homemade apple pie. "I can't pay for this," the young man protested. "Did I ask you to pay?" Maria smiled, echoing the words she'd spoken to David 15 years earlier. "Everybody needs to eat. That's not about money. That's about being human." As the young man began to eat, tears forming in his eyes with relief and gratitude, Maria felt the circle of kindness completing itself once again. She thought about the foundation Isabella had built, about the countless other communities where similar acts of compassion were creating ripples of positive change. David appeared at her elbow, having noticed the interaction from the kitchen. He squeezed her hand gently, understanding without words what was happening. "Some things never change," he whispered. "Some things shouldn't change," Maria replied. They watched as the young man finished his meal, his color improving and his shoulders straightening with each bite. When he was done, Maria gave him information about job openings she'd heard about, including a position at a restaurant in the next town that was looking for experienced cooks. "Why are you doing this?" the young man asked as he prepared to leave. Maria thought about how to answer, about the long chain of kindness that had brought them to this moment. "Because someone once told me that good people make it through. They find their way. I'm just trying to make sure that's true." After the young man left, promising to call about the job leads, Maria and David finished their closing routine. Isabella had already gone home to her apartment, but she'd left a note on the office desk. "Thank you for teaching me that kindness isn't just something you do, it's something you are. Love, I." As they locked up the restaurant and walked to their car, Maria and David didn't talk much. They were both thinking about the evening, about the young man they'd helped, about the countless small acts of kindness that had shaped their lives and their community. "Do you think he'll be okay?" David asked as they drove through the quiet streets of Knowbrook. "I think he'll be fine," Maria replied with confidence. "He's got something most people don't have." "What's that?" "He's got the memory of someone believing in him. That's more powerful than he knows right now, but someday he'll understand. And when he does, he'll pass it on to someone else." They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about the mysterious way that kindness multiplies. How a single sandwich given to a hungry teenager on a cold night can grow into something that touches hundreds of lives across multiple communities. The next morning, Maria woke up to find a text message from an unknown number. "Got the job. Thank you for believing in me. Sunday I'll pay it forward." She smiled and showed the message to David, who was already up making coffee. "There it is," he said. "The circle continues." "It always does," Maria replied. "That's the beautiful thing about kindness. It never really ends." Outside their kitchen window, the sun was rising over Millbrook, casting golden light on the small city that had become their home and their mission. Somewhere in town, Rosie's Diner stood ready for another day of serving food and building community. Somewhere else, Isabella was probably already working on plans for the foundation's next project. And somewhere, a young man was getting ready for his first day at a new job, carrying with him the knowledge that strangers could become family, that kindness was always possible, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could change your alarm. Everything. This was their legacy, Maria realized. Not just the restaurant or the foundation, or the individual lives they'd touched, but the understanding that every person had the power to make a difference in someone else's story. It had started with a sandwich and a cup of coffee on a cold December night, but it had grown into something much larger, a network of compassion that stretched far beyond what any of them could have imagined. As Maria got ready for another day at Rosie's Diner, she thought about the young man from the night before, about David sleeping in the alley 15 years ago, about Isabella working to change the world, about all the people whose lives had intersected with theirs in ways both small and profound. She thought about the power of seeing someone's need and responding with generosity, about the way that small acts of kindness could create waves of change that rippled outward in directions you never expected. The story that had begun with a hungry teenager and a sandwich had become something much larger, a testament to the truth that kindness is never wasted, that compassion is always an investment in a better future, and that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become the foundation for the most extraordinary transformations. And in a few hours, when the first customers of the day walked through the doors of Rosie's Diner, the story would continue, one conversation, one meal, one small act of kindness at a time.